There are moments when life speaks, not in words, but in pattern events so perfectly timed they feel like echoes from a future you haven't lived yet. This isn't just a story about coincidence. It's about a quiet choreography that lives beneath what we call reality. Take a breath and feel into it. Let the noise of your day fall away. Let your nervous system soften. You're exactly where you need to be. If this found you, perhaps it was meant to. Before we begin, make sure you're cozy. Tell me, where in the world are you right now? And what time is it? Let this be your check-in. This is the story of a man, a book, a train, and a whisper in the fabric of time. A tale that begins in the heart of the city, but soon unravels into something far stranger. What if you've already encountered the signs? What if the universe isn't random at all, but responding to your very becoming? There are patterns that do not announce themselves with clarity, but instead unfold like whispered instructions, almost inaudible, hidden in the folds of ordinary days. They do not come with thunder or certainty. They arrive softly, cloaked in coincidence, encoded in timing, so precise it stirs something ancient in the body before the mind can catch up. Most people live through them unaware, brushing off the strangeness with a quick laugh or an uneasy shrug. What are the odds? We say, as if the soul hasn't been quietly preparing for that moment long before it arrived. But some feel it. Some know when the pattern is speaking. And sometimes, life lets us watch the pattern stitch itself in real time. In the 1970s, actor Anthony Hopkins was preparing for a role that required more than memorization. It asked for absorption, empathy, cultural nuance, and an almost psychic fidelity to emotion. The character came from a novel, one not widely read, not taught in schools or shelved in chain bookstores. The kind of book that leaves no digital trail. The kind whose soul is hidden in the creases of paper, in the breath between lines. Hopkins needed that book, not just the words, but the presence of it, the energetic signature that only a physical object, long held and well-worn, could deliver. So he began searching through London, from gleaming bookshops to dim, dusty backroom archives. His hands touched spines like they were rosary beads, his eyes scanning titles with the hope of revelation. But each inquiry led to a gentle no. The book had vanished from circulation, like some stories do when they are waiting to re-emerge at the perfect time. It wasn't available for order. There were no reprints, and no clerk had even heard of it. Hopkins walked through the city with the quiet fatigue of someone chasing something sacred and invisible, unsure if it would ever be found. He boarded a train on the London Underground that evening, just another commuter among many, the weight of the day's unanswered longing sitting heavily in his chest. The lights in the carriage hummed with sterile indifference, the rhythm of the train rocking the body into a lull. He didn't expect anything, not then, but the pattern had already begun its dance. A woman near him rose quickly as the train pulled into the next station. In her rush, she left something behind, just a book on the seat, worn, spine cracked, pages gently curled at the edges. Hopkins picked it up, a reflex more than a decision. And when his eyes landed on the cover, time stilled. It was the book, the exact one. Not just the title, not just the author. The same edition, the same print run, the very object he had spent the day chasing without success. And the pattern wasn't finished yet. Months later, while filming the adaptation, he met the author of the novel and casually mentioned how he had found the book. The author's face paled. That copy, he said softly, had once been his. Loaned to a friend and never returned. Lost. And now, inexplicably, it had found its way into Hopkins' hands, precisely when it was needed. The moment was too aligned, too perfect to file under coincidence. Something had intervened. Something had aligned timelines, softened the walls between people, places, and intention, and handed him the story just in time. But this is not just a story about a book or an actor. It is an invitation to remember how life actually moves. Through resonance, through rhythm, through fields we cannot see, but can sometimes feel humming beneath our choices. What happened on that train was not magic. It was not miracle in the traditional sense. It was alignment, a kind of soft orchestration that occurs when inner readiness meets outer synchronicity. Jung named it synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence, without a cause. But that definition is only a doorway. Walk through it, and you find a living architecture behind reality, one that does not organize by logic, but by frequency. Our thoughts, our longings, our fears, they don't merely float in the background of our lives. They communicate, they attract, they generate subtle ripples that bend the probabilities of life around them. And sometimes, when the frequency is clear and the moment is ripe, those ripples crest into form, into a book on a train, into a stranger saying the exact sentence your soul needed to hear, into the door that opens just as you arrive, not a second too soon or late. Have you ever thought of someone only for them to text moments later? Have you ever walked into a room you've never visited and felt as if you'd been there before? These aren't accidents. They are echoes of your participation in something greater. They are moments when reality folds, not to confuse you, but to remind you that you are not merely walking through life, you are shaping it. Perception is not passive. Attention is not neutral. Every emotion you feel is a tuning fork. Every hope you hold is a signal. And life, if you pay attention, responds. The field we move through is not static, it's intelligent. But its language is not English or numbers. It speaks in metaphor, in timing, in pattern. That's why synchronicities often take symbolic forms, repeating numbers, animal sightings, lyrics that mirror your dreams. You dream of drowning when you are emotionally overwhelmed. You see ravens when death of ego, of identity, of old stories is near. These signs are not superstitions. They are the outer reflections of an inner shift. Your subconscious knows before you do, and the universe listens to your subconscious. It listens not to your words, but to your vibration. And as strange as it sounds, this communication is not linear. Sometimes the message arrives before the question. Sometimes the answer precedes the need. And that is where quantum understanding begins to whisper through the cracks of our ordinary days. Quantum physics has already shown that the act of observation collapses possibility into reality. A particle, until observed, is both here and not here. It is potential. The moment it is measured, it becomes one thing or another. In other words, consciousness shapes form. Your awareness is not a flashlight shining into the dark. It is a sculptor. What you believe, expect, and emotionally invest in begins to manifest form around you. This doesn't mean every wish comes true instantly. It means every sincere, coherent signal you send out becomes a gravitational pull for experience. The stronger the alignment between your inner truth and your outer action, the faster the world responds. Not always how you expect, but unmistakably. Like a story moving toward its climax, scenes begin to arrange themselves. Coincidences pile up. Clocks repeat numbers. Old friends call. Books fall off shelves. And if you're paying attention, you'll notice that the feeling you have during those moments is not shock, it's recognition. It feels like remembering, because part of you already knew, already sensed, already participated in that unfolding. And this isn't fantasy. It's field intelligence. It's the truth that human consciousness may not be separate from the reality it perceives, but a co-creator of it. When Hopkins found that book, he didn't just receive something, he aligned with it. His longing, his focus, his readiness summoned it. And the universe responded not with fireworks, but with elegance, with intimacy, With that quiet little miracle we too often dismiss. The pattern had spoken. And it had spoken in the exact language he could understand. Story. But that pattern isn't rare. It is everywhere, waiting to be seen. It waits for your stillness. It waits for your clarity. It waits for the moment you stop chasing outcomes and begin noticing alignment. And when you do, life stops being random. It becomes a conversation. What do you do when the world starts whispering back in the same language you've only spoken in dreams? When objects, strangers, and moments begin to respond not to your actions, but to your presence, your essence, your frequency before words? It begins subtly at first, the way light shifts across a wall just before sunset, or the air thickens moments before a storm breaks. The signs come wrapped in ordinariness. You walk into a bookstore and see the exact sentence your soul needed, on the cover of a novel facing outward. You think of a childhood friend you haven't spoken to in years, and they appear in your inbox within hours. You change your route home without logic, only to discover later that something dangerous had unfolded where you were meant to be. These moments are dismissed too easily. We call them flukes, coincidences, anomalies. But inside your nervous system, something else is happening. Your breath changes, your shoulders drop, your vision widens. It's as though the deeper intelligence of life has paused to look directly at you without blinking. And for a second, you remember. You remember that you're not just living in the world, you're in relationship with it. And relationships, real ones, are always reciprocal. They listen, respond, and adjust. Reality, too, seems to listen. But not to your words. It listens to the signal beneath them. Your vibration, your alignment, your true orientation, whether you're in coherence or fragmentation, whether you're moving from your center or from your fear. This is why synchronicity often arrives during times of transition, when your identity is unraveling, when your former plans are collapsing, when you're not quite who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. In those liminal spaces, you are soft, open, uncertain. The fabric of the world seems to thin. You start seeing numbers that repeat. You hear songs with lyrics that map your emotional state precisely. A bird lands beside you and stares. A stranger uses the exact metaphor you dreamed of the night before. You feel watched, not by surveillance, but by the benevolent presence of something ancient, wise, and curious. The veil lifts slightly, and behind it, you catch glimpses of the pattern. Not the mechanical, predictable kind, but the kind that flows like music. The kind that follows tone, not rule. Emotion, not reason. You begin to sense that life is not structured like a machine, but like a symphony. And your emotions, especially the ones that feel inconvenient or overwhelming, are instruments tuning the space around you. If you feel lost, the world grows foggy. If you feel clear, synchronicities arrive faster. If you are present, fully, something clicks. The pieces realign. And what once felt random becomes so specific it almost startles you. This doesn't mean life is predictable. Quite the opposite. It means that unpredictability itself is part of the dance. That surprise is the signature of participation. Imagine you are a tuning fork walking through a sea of potential. Every thought, every emotional beat sends out vibrations. These vibrations shape the quality of your perception and alter what you are able to receive. Two people can walk into the same room and see two different worlds. One sees scarcity, fear, rejection. The other sees opportunity, invitation, alignment. Not because the room is different, but because their internal state is different. This is the secret of creation we were never taught. Reality is participatory. And the strongest force you emit is not your intellect, it's your coherence, your emotional congruence, your clarity of being. When your thoughts, feelings, and actions are in resonance with your deeper truth, the pattern becomes visible. Not all at once, not in full, but enough to guide you. Enough to orient you like a star through fog. This is why some synchronicities feel like gentle confirmation. You take a bold step, quit a job, leave a relationship, move to a new city, and the signs follow. A line from a podcast, a mural on a building, a phrase from a stranger in the elevator. It all seems to whisper the same message. Keep going. And that whisper matters more than we admit. It can keep someone alive. It can keep someone from walking away from a dream too early. Synchronicity is not about proving the universe exists. It's about remembering you belong to it. There are types of synchronicity that speak in different dialects, if you listen closely. There is the protective, kind, subtle delays that save you. A flat tire that frustrates you, only for you to later learn it kept you from being in the wrong place, at the wrong time. A missed flight that keeps you tethered to safety without your knowing. These moments rarely feel like grace in the moment. They feel like disruption, but time reveals their deeper function. They were pattern corrections, reroutes, your frequency. Sent out an unconscious request for preservation, and the field responded. Then there are the generative synchronicities, those that feel like portals opening. You think of someone, and they message you. You desire something, deeply and without grasping, and it shows up in a way you could not have plotted. These are the moments that feel like magic, but they're not magic. They're momentum, the result of accumulated coherence, of inner truth meeting outer form. The most haunting type of synchronicity, however, is the symbolic. It doesn't give answers. It gives mirrors. It speaks in dreams, in archetypes, in layered metaphor. You dream of a house, and a week later, you're invited to a home that feels eerily familiar. You keep seeing crows, and later learn they were sacred to a lineage you've just reconnected with. You find a feather in a room with no windows, and it reminds you of someone who passed years ago. These events cannot be explained by logic, and they're not meant to be. Their purpose isn't understanding. It's reorientation. A nudge, a pulse from the field that says, pay attention. In the symbolic language of synchronicity, numbers often speak loudest. 11:11, 3:33, 5:55. We laugh at them, roll our eyes, but something inside us notices. These numbers show up at transition points, decisions, or moments of deep reflection. They are not codes to be cracked. They are reminders. The universe doesn't speak English. It speaks in sensation. It speaks in beauty. It speaks in symbols. And symbols do not instruct, they reveal. They require presence. They require stillness. And most of all, they require trust. Because the moment you start chasing signs, they disappear. But the moment you start living in alignment, they flood in. This is the paradox. Synchronicity is not the goal. Alignment is. Synchronicity is the feedback. And when you understand that, you stop asking for signs and start becoming the kind of person who naturally magnetizes them. Your body becomes the compass. Your breath becomes the key. And your life begins to move with a rhythm you can't always hear, but you can always feel. You make decisions not just from logic, but from resonance. A yes feels expansive, light, electric. A no feels tight, dull, resistant. Your emotions become data. Your joy becomes strategy. Your heartbreak becomes a teacher. You are no longer trying to control reality. You are learning to dance with it. You're not forcing doors open. You're arriving just as they unlock. And each time you do, something in you remembers the choreography. And perhaps the deepest truth is this: synchronicity often arises most clearly when you stop trying to be someone, when you let go of forcing outcomes, when you stop reciting affirmations like incantations and begin living from the truth of who you are. Then things move, not because you willed them, but because you became undeniable. Because the version of you who wasn't chasing, who wasn't pleasing, who wasn't manipulating, was finally free. And freedom vibrates at a frequency reality cannot ignore. It changes the shape of your relationships, the timing of opportunities, the behavior of matter itself. And when you realize that, something inside you softens. You begin to live slower. You breathe deeper. You speak less and listen more. You begin to understand that synchronicities are not answers. They are invitations, not to decode life, but to enter it fully, to respond with courage, to trust what pulls you, even when it makes no sense, to show up where your soul tugs you, even if it terrifies your ego. Because on the other side of every synchronicity is a choice, to return to sleep or to awaken further. And awakening doesn't mean you understand everything. It means you begin to trust the not knowing. You begin to participate. And in that participation, the pattern continues to reveal itself, not because you force it, but because you're ready. Eventually, as you begin to live more and more in alignment with your own inner rhythm, you realize that the question isn't, how can I make synchronicities happen? The real question becomes, what am I becoming that synchronicities are starting to appear so frequently? Because at some point, the signs stop feeling like signs and start feeling like companions. Not clues to be interpreted, but confirmations of a relationship that is already active. You begin to realize that reality isn't something you enter, each day like a stage, but something you co-compose as you go. And as this awareness deepens, the line between inner and outer blurs. What used to feel like the world happening to you begins to feel like the world responding to you. You notice how small adjustments in your emotional state change what appears in your field. You witness how a moment of genuine peace felt in your chest, not forced in your mind, somehow leads to the right message, the gentle call, the small opening. And you begin to trust that consciousness is not local, not trapped behind your eyes or within the skull. It is woven into the very fabric of the field around you. It's not that you are thinking your way into a new life. It's that you are attuning yourself to the layer of life that has always been waiting for you to notice it. In this state, time softens. Events do not march in sequence as much as they spiral inward. Sometimes the guidance shows up before the decision. Sometimes the person appears before the question is fully formed. And this is where we begin to understand the most mysterious type of synchronicity of all, the one that seems to rewrite the past itself. The creation synchronicity. The moment where your clarity is so potent, your intent so stable, your presence so anchored, that the field reorganizes not only your present experience, but retroactively stitches events in your timeline to support it. It's not that you predicted something. It's that your soul's coherence caused the moment to appear, and once it did, the entire past rearranged to make it feel inevitable. You've felt this before, when you finally meet someone who feels like you've known them for lifetimes, and you look back and see how every heartbreak led to this opening. Or when the opportunity lands in your lap, and you suddenly realize you've been preparing for it in ways you didn't even notice. These are not illusions. These are the real mechanics of energy and presence. What you feel deeply and clearly begins to move through timelines, not to manipulate events, but to harmonize them. And this harmony is the essence of the pattern knot. Something you can control, but something you can join. You don't chase it. You become available to it. And availability is not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about humility. It's about surrendering the need to know, to grasp, to force. Because the pattern never shows itself through effort. It emerges through quiet clarity. And that clarity is emotional, energetic, and spiritual, not always logical. That's why some of the most powerful synchronicities happen when you've finally given up, when your ego has collapsed under the weight of trying, and all that remains is the quiet willingness to see. That's when the phone rings. That's when the door opens. That's when the book appears on the train. And not because you chased it, but because you became a space in which it could arrive. This is the art of participation, not manipulating reality, but preparing yourself to hold what is already making its way to you. But how do you live like this without becoming obsessed with signs? The answer is subtle. You don't worship the signs. You don't turn them into idols. You let them remain what they are: echoes, reflections, invitations. You honor them without clinging. You smile, say thank you, and continue walking. The real transformation isn't in what appears, it's in how you move, how you speak, how you listen. When you truly understand synchronicity, you stop asking, "What does it mean?" and start asking, "What does this moment ask of me?" You respond. You show up. You trust. And trust, when matured, becomes a kind of silence. You no longer need constant confirmation. You no longer need the numbers to line up every hour. You no longer need feathers and flickering lights to validate your path. The pattern has moved from the outer world to your bones. It has become internalized. You feel it in your pacing, in your tone of voice, in how gently you close a door, or how deeply you breathe before saying yes. It lives in your cells. And from that place, synchronicities become more subtle, less flashy, less dramatic, but more profound, because they're no longer happening to you. They are happening through you. Your life becomes the synchronicity. Your presence becomes the message. You start arriving in the exact moment someone needs a word, a hand, a silence. You start holding space without knowing why, and then realizing why only later. You feel the urge to turn left instead of right, and find yourself at the intersection of someone else's awakening. These are not coincidences. These are the coordinates of an awakening soul. You're not just receiving signs, you've become one. And in this way, synchronicity evolves from curiosity into devotion. You don't just observe the mystery, you serve it. You protect it. You walk with it in ordinary moments, not needing to explain, only to embody. And that embodiment changes the field around you. Because when enough people start living this way, tuned in, soft, curious, surrendered, the collective field shifts. Patterns become easier to recognize. Coherence spreads like sunlight across a dark room, and the world begins to feel less separate, less sharp, less hostile. Synchronicity then becomes not just a personal gift, but a cultural phenomenon. A new kind of language. A way of building bridges without plans. A way of healing timelines, not through analysis, but through presence. You'll see it in families where old wounds soften without needing to be named. In friendships where conversations arrive just when one soul is breaking open. In communities where intuition organizes efforts better than strategy. This is not chaos, it is intelligence. But it is not the intelligence of machines. It is the intelligence of trees, of rivers, of breath. It is fluid. It is feminine. It is not extractive, it is relational. And to trust it, we must unlearn everything we were taught about control. We must learn to dance, not to lead. To feel the rhythm, not impose one. To let the body move before the mind interprets. This is what synchronicity teaches when followed all the way through, not that life is predictable, but that it is responsive. That reality is not cold, it is alive. And that aliveness listens to what is quiet, honest, and real within you. Not what is polished, not what is projected, but what is raw. If you have ever broken down in your car, only to be helped by the one person you needed to meet. If you have ever wandered into a place with no plan and found the answer you'd been aching for. If you've ever been held at your most hopeless moment by a force you could not see, then you already know this truth. You've already touched the edge of the pattern. And now, it's not just about recognizing it. It's about living from it. Letting it inform your pace, your choices, your silence. Letting it remind you that you are not late, that you are not lost, that you are not alone. The pattern is not something outside of you. It is what pulses beneath your name, beneath your thoughts, beneath every breath you've ever taken. It is the deeper language of the life that lives you. And the moment you surrender to its timing, it shows you that you are never waiting. You are always arriving, not at some point. You stop needing the signs to prove anything. Not because you no longer believe in them, but because something quieter inside you has taken their place. You begin to notice that what you once waited for in the world now begins within you, like a breath forming before the wind, like a thought that no longer needs language to feel true. And this shift is not dramatic. It does not arrive with thunder, or sparks, or the sudden disappearance of doubt. It arrives as a soft familiarity, a subtle knowing, a deepened presence that no longer rushes to interpret what everything means. Instead of chasing synchronicities, you begin to embody the state that draws them near. You move through the world like a lighthouse, not trying to light the path for others, but simply standing rooted in your own steady glow. And in this state, the strange alignments don't stop, they increase. But they stop feeling like external validation and start feeling like seamless participation. You'll find yourself humming a song you haven't heard in years, only for the next car you pass to be playing that very melody. You'll feel a sentence rise in your mind, and the next billboard you see echoes it word for word. You'll walk into a room where the air is thick with something you can't describe, and within moments, someone starts crying, not from sadness, but because they felt seen without having to be explained. This is resonance at work. This is coherence in motion. This is what it feels like when your nervous system stops vibrating with anxiety and starts humming in time with a deeper rhythm of reality. And this rhythm doesn't belong to one belief, system, or culture. It is the native music of consciousness itself. A same pulse that moves tides and seasons, that rotates galaxies and softens eyelids just before sleep, that spins electrons into position and guides birds across oceans. It is also what guides you, and it has always been guiding you. The only difference now is that you're beginning to listen without needing evidence. You're feeling the difference between noise and signal, between performance and presence, between striving and becoming. And with each passing day, the version of you that needed proof begins to dissolve gently without shame. What replaces it isn't certainty, it's intimacy, a softer relationship with time, a quieter relationship with choice. You begin to understand that not all movement is progress, and not all stillness is stagnation. Sometimes the most powerful decision is to pause, to breathe, to wait for the internal yes that comes not from logic, but from resonance. And when you wait for that yes, when you stop acting from panic or pressure, you find that life begins to organize itself around you, not in the way your ego would have chosen, not always with ease or comfort, but with precision, with symbolism, with grace that sometimes looks like loss, but always reveals itself as realignment. The truth is, the deeper you walk into this way of living, the more your old sense of self starts to unravel. Not because you've become someone new, but because you've remembered someone ancient, someone whole. You look back on the years you spent pushing, proving, performing, and you bless them, but you no longer belong to them. You see the phases when you begged for signs, begged for direction, begged for love that would mirror your worth back to you. And you hold those parts of yourself with tenderness, but you do not return to them, because now you've seen what happens when you stop asking for the world to show up and start showing up for yourself. You've seen what happens when your frequency becomes the invitation, not your effort, not your persona, but your signal. And this signal is not just emotional, it's vibrational. It's the subtle field that emanates from a coherent nervous system, a softened heart, a steady spine, a mind no longer spinning stories, but listening instead. And from this signal, life organizes differently. The phone call comes not when you chase it, but when you forget you need it. The opportunity arises not when you strive, but when you surrender. The sentence you needed appears not in a book you hunted down, but in the folds of a stranger's casual remark as you pass them on the street. These aren't accidents. They are attunements. Life is tuning to you because you've stopped distorting your note. You've stopped singing from fear. You've stopped masking your frequency with obligation, with approval-seeking, with narratives that never belong to you. And now, what arrives is cleaner, simpler, quieter, but more powerful than anything you forced before. This is the reward for releasing the illusion of control. And it isn't the only reward, because what comes next is even more sacred. The realization that you are not alone in your tuning, that others are tuning too, that you are not the only one receiving the hum beneath things. You begin to find others not through searching, but through resonance. You recognize them by how your body responds, not by how your mind approves. These are the people who make your shoulders drop, your breath deepen, your masks fall away without effort. These are the people with whom silence becomes a language, with whom timing feels sacred, not pressured, with whom synchronicities increase just by being together. These aren't soulmates in the romanticized sense. They are soul mirrors, pattern companions. You do not possess them. You witness each other. You hold the same frequency, and thus you echo. And when you echo like this, you start to realize that the pattern was never about your individual path. It was about the collective song being remembered through individual chords, the music of the whole being played again, note by note, through the awakening of each coherent life. And so your attention begins to shift, less toward what is the sign, and more toward what am I radiating. You begin to tend to your signal like a garden, gently, daily, reverently. You water it with silence. You prune it with boundaries. You nourish it with honesty. And as you do, your life becomes a field of invitation, not only for synchronicities, but for peace, for creativity, for healing. And healing here doesn't mean the erasure of pain. It means the inclusion of truth, the embracing of wholeness, the end of the war within. Because when the war ends within you, the outer world begins to reflect that truce. Chaos may still swirl, uncertainty may still knock, but something in you remains unmoved. And this stillness becomes your oracle, your anchor, your compass. And from that anchor, synchronicities no longer feel like waves crashing against you. They feel like tides moving with you, nudging, guiding, calling you toward the next right moment. Not with urgency, but with rhythm, with trust. And you begin to trust, not because the world is always safe, but because you have learned to stay with yourself, even when it isn't. That is the ultimate synchronicity. Not the one that appears outside, but the one that appears inside. The returning of yourself to yourself. The recognition that the same intelligence that guides the stars guides your breath. That the same pattern that aligned a book on a train aligns your life in every small decision made from truth. You see it now. You feel it. You live it. And that changes everything. Because now, you are not just someone hoping to be chosen by life. You are someone who knows you are already part of its choosing. Eventually, a new question begins to replace all the old ones, not, what should I do? Or, where should I go? Or will I be okay? But rather a single subtle question whispered from your center. What wants to move through me now? It is a different kind of inquiry, one born not from panic or longing, but from participation, from listening. And when you begin living from this space, something profound happens. Your life stops being a project and starts becoming a pulse, a rhythm, a living, breathing ecosystem of relationships, insights, and invitations that arrive, precisely when you are ready to receive them. But readiness no longer means perfection. It means openness, receptivity, alignment, not achievement. Because you've come to understand that life doesn't respond to how hard you try, it responds to how clearly you tune. When your inner signal is static, tangled in shame or urgency or identity games, the pattern seems chaotic. But when your inner world settles, when it becomes a calm lake rather than a stormy sea, the reflections return. The signals amplify. The field around you begins to shimmer with intention. The right people call. The right phrases rise in conversation. The right doors nudge open, just wide enough for you to step through with grace. But you're no longer surprised by these moments. You're no longer grasping for meaning. You're simply noticing again and again that reality is not fixed, it's responsive. That the universe is not a mechanism, it's a mirror. And what it reflects is not your thoughts, but your frequency. Not your masks, but your essence. And as that essence stabilizes, so does your trust. Not blind trust in outcomes, but embodied trust in your presence. You stop bracing for impact and start breathing for connection. You no longer obsess over timelines, you listen for timing. You no longer fixate on signs, you focus on staying tuned. Because you know now that signs arrive not to lead you, but to echo you. They are not instructions, they are confirmations. And when you stop making them idols, they become allies, gentle signals, sacred reminders, quiet winks from a reality that has been collaborating with your becoming from the very start. You begin to feel less like you are on a path, and more like you are the path itself. Each step forming not from calculation, but from coherence. And this coherence can be felt. It hums in your spine. It radiates in your breath. It pulses in your relationships, which grow softer, deeper, more honest. Conversations stop being about being right and start being about being real. You no longer measure success by what you have, but by how freely energy moves through your life. And that freedom becomes contagious. Your presence becomes medicine. Your calm becomes a tuning fork for the spaces you enter. You notice that the room feels better when you've sat in it for a while, not because you've said anything, but because you've listened. Not because you've fixed anything, but because you've allowed it. And this allowance becomes your art dot. You stop rushing. You stop forcing. You stop performing coherence and start embodying it. And from that embodiment, synchronicities become inevitable. Not because you chase them, but because you've become the kind of person they want to dance with. You become a sacred mirror for others, reflecting the pattern back to them when they forget. And you do it without needing credit, without needing to be seen, because you're no longer trying to matter. You already know you do. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You already feel chosen by life itself, by this breath, by the quiet sacredness of existing right now. And in that deep exhale, you realize this was never about bending the world to your will. It was about remembering how to move with it, to feel where it flows, to sense when it whispers wait, and when it sings go. And this dance, this movement, becomes the true alchemy. You are no longer resisting what is, you are partnering with it. You are letting life show you how it wants to unfold through you. And every time you surrender a little more, every time you loosen your grip and widen your gaze, the pattern becomes clearer. Not in the way of maps or certainty, but in the way of music. You begin to hear it everywhere, in pauses, in laughter, in tears, in how someone's eyes shift when they are on the edge of saying something real. You notice that the more aligned you are, the less language you need. Presence speaks first. Timing speaks loudest. And stillness becomes your teacher. Not the kind that hands out rules, but the kind that invites revelation. You begin to trust your body as an instrument, not a liability to fix, but a listening device to tune. And it tells you things that logic cannot. It tells you when to stay, when to leave, when to speak, when to rest. And when you listen, life responds with elegance. The story you once tried to write with certainty now writes itself through you. But this time, you don't cling to the pen. You trust the ink. You trust that what flows is enough. That your job is not to control the script, but to stay honest with your signal. And that honesty becomes your frequency. Not a brand, not a role, not a performance, just truth. Quiet, daily, living truth. And this truth is magnetic. It draws what is meant. It dissolves what is not. And you stop arguing with either outcome. Because you know, the pattern has perfect timing, even when you don't, especially when you don't. There's a tenderness in that surrender, a reverence, a softness you used to fear because you thought soft meant weak. But now you know soft means attuned. Soft means aware. Soft means powerful without needing to dominate. And from that softness, your life expands not outward, but inward. More intimacy, more presence, more awe at the quiet choreography happening beneath the surface of things. And this awe becomes your practice. You greet each moment with less urgency, more curiosity. You no longer pray for signs. You live as if you are one. A living message, a breathing alignment, a signal sent on behalf of something larger that wants to remind others they are not lost either. And when you begin to live like this, synchronicities become the air you breathe. You no longer wait for them, they wait for you. And when you show up in integrity, they flood in. Not because they are rewards, but because they are recognition. Because the pattern sees you, mirrors you, honors your courage to stay awake. And that recognition, that meeting between you and the living field, changes everything. You are not just a person having experiences. You are awareness itself, learning how to participate. And the more you participate not by controlling, but by surrendering, the more vivid the pattern becomes. The more deeply you feel its rhythm. And the more clearly you realize the pattern isn't out there. It's not in the signs. It's not in the numbers. It's not even in the synchronicities themselves. The pattern is you. It always has been . And then one day, without fanfare or confirmation, you arrive not at a destination, but at a frequency so stable it no longer needs proof. The questions fall silent. The search softens. The old ache to be validated dissolves, not because you've found the answer, but because you've become the signal itself. The universe no longer needs to send you signs, because you are now in dialogue with it in every breath, every gesture, every wordless knowing. The pattern no longer feels like something you observe or chase. It feels like something you move from, something you live from, something that echoes through your fingertips and softens your voice, that expands the spaces you enter and slows down the chaos around you without effort. You no longer feel like a character lost inside a script. You feel like the author rediscovering your voice with every aligned choice. And the strangest part is how natural it feels, how quietly obvious. As if the whole time, life had been waiting for you to stop doubting your place in the choreography. You see it now. There was no delay, no mistake, no wasted path. Everything was preparation. Every hesitation was ripening. Every misstep, a necessary spiral. And the deeper you breathe this in, the more you see that synchronicities were never anomalies. They were introductions. Each one a gentle reminder, placed just when your frequency was rising enough to perceive it. The missed bus. The sudden urge to turn down a different street. The phrase in the book you almost didn't pick up. The person you met in the checkout line who spoke to something ancient inside you without knowing why. These moments weren't lucky, they were listening. They were the pattern moving toward you as you moved toward yourself. And now that you've come into coherence, they no longer feel like magic. They feel like relationship. They feel like breath. And from here, the world becomes less of a place and more of a presence. The air around you hums with participation. The spaces you occupy begin to respond not to your words, but to your field. And your field is clear, now not because you've healed everything, but because you've stopped hiding. And what you stop hiding, you stop distorting. And what you stop distorting, life can finally mirror back. The alignment isn't perfect, but it's honest. And that honesty becomes the tuning fork that keeps you inside the rhythm of what wants. To unfold, you no longer need to be right, you need to be real. You no longer need to predict, you need to feel. You no longer need a path, you need a pulse. And the moment you follow that pulse, the pattern begins folding reality around your presence, not to reward you, but to include you. You are part of its design, now not a guest, but a participant. And that participation is what reshapes your life from the inside out. This is where you begin to realize something else, something quieter, but even more profound, that everything you once called coincidence was a form of conversation. That the book wasn't placed on the train seat by luck, but by resonance. That your longing reached backward in time and softened the walls between people and places until the right object arrived, disguised as forgotten. That your grief shaped the weather. That your joy shaped the timing. That your clarity moved events into motion. And not in a metaphorical way, but in a way the field could feel. Because the field is always feeling. Not judging, not scripting, feeling. And what it feels from you becomes form. Which means that the version of you that wakes each morning in devotion, not to certainty, but to presence, is already shifting the fabric of the day before it unfolds. It means that your integrity rearranges timelines, that your surrender alters probability, that your listening clears space for the improbable to become obvious. And when this becomes embodied, not believed, but lived, you stop trying to manipulate anything. You stop asking for outcomes. You stop resisting your own unfolding, because you realize that the pattern cannot be improved, only trusted. It has never been random. It has only ever been waiting. And the one it was waiting for was you, not the polished version, not the one that has the answers, not the one that performs worthiness, just you, breathing, feeling, noticing, allowing, living from the middle of your body instead of the corners of your mind, living from the question instead of rushing for the answer, living from resonance instead of rigidity, from rhythm instead of reaction, from knowing instead of noise. This is the return, not to something new, but to something ancient, something you were born with, then taught to forget. But forgetting was part of the design too. The forgetting carved space for longing. The longing carved space for rediscovery. And rediscovery carved space for reverence. And now, reverence is the atmosphere you move through, no matter where you are. The pattern isn't something you wait for anymore. It's something you serve. It's something you protect. It's something you embody, not in grand gestures, but in micro movements. In how you hold eye contact. In how you let go of control when the moment asks for surrender. In how you honor the pace of what's real instead of chasing what's fast. In how you sense when something is off, even when everyone else insists it's fine. Your body is no longer a burden. It is a compass. Your sensitivity is no longer a liability. It is a gift. Your perception is no longer a passive lens. It is a creative force. And everything that moves through it, thoughts, emotions, images, intuitions, can be held with compassion now, because nothing needs to be judged when everything is information. And you've learned how to listen for truth by how it feels, not how it sounds. You've learned that beauty is an alignment cue. That ease is a calibration tool. That joy, not obligation, is the frequency of wisdom. And you've stopped apologizing for living from that wisdom. Because you've seen what happens when you do. The world stops rushing. A noise fades. The conversations deepen. And the pattern, which used to feel like something separate and mysterious, becomes a rhythm you carry inside your chest, beating, not for performance, not for achievement, just to feel what it means to be alive and aligned at the same time. And so now you walk differently. You choose differently. You listen not just for content, but for coherence. You ask not, what do I want? But what feels like alignment in this moment? And when you do, time shifts. Not because you control it, but because you stop resisting it. You begin to see that the pattern is not linear. It loops, spirals, folds back on itself in gentle echoes. What you thought was lost finds you again, dressed as something new. What you buried resurfaces, not to haunt you, but to integrate. What you tried to outrun becomes your greatest teacher. And you no longer panic when things fall apart because you felt what happens when something real wants to take its place. You've seen how grace hides inside endings, how timing hides inside detours, how the most beautiful synchronicities arrive in the space where you stopped demanding and started receiving. And you've come to know that the pattern isn't fragile, it's indestructible. It weaves through your life even when you can't see it, especially when you forget. And all it asks over and over, in silence and in symbol, is the same thing. Will you trust it this time? Will you allow it to move through you without interference? Will you let it teach you not by explanation, but by experience? Will you let it rewrite your relationship to mystery? And when you say yes, not with your mouth, but with your being, it doesn't reward you. It reveals you. It returns you to yourself, the way light returns to a mirror, not because the mirror asked, but because it was finally clean enough to reflect it. That's all synchronicity has ever been. Light returning, form rearranging around truth, not to impress you, but to remind you, to remember you, to move with you now, because you've become still enough to move with it. So now, you sit quietly, not because you've stopped moving, but because you finally arrived inside yourself. The pattern isn't something to find anymore. It's something to feel, to trust, to walk with in silence as life continues, to unfold in its quiet brilliance. You no longer need the book on the train, or the stranger's perfect words, or the repeating numbers to prove anything. You carry the signal now. You are the signal now. And in the gentle awareness that you are both participant and presence, both mirror and movement, you begin to live each moment not with urgency, but with reverence. Let the signs come if they must. Let them fade if they need to. You are not here to chase. You are here to remember, to align, to embody what you once only glimpsed. And if you're still listening, still breathing in this pause, then perhaps something deep inside you already knows. This story found you when you were ready to hear it. Subscribe if your path feels gentler now. Other stories are waiting to meet you in their own perfect timing. Until then, carry the pattern quietly. It's already carrying you.